everybody. Welcome back to Keith and Mike Watch Deep Space Nine. Today we are talking about a sneaky important episode of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Of course, we're talking about Season 2, Episode 7, Rules of Acquisition. Mike, you have been fighting tech all morning. We're going to cheer you up with some hot Deep Space Nine content. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing all right. Things just weren't agreeing with me today. That's fine. Now my in-ears aren't working well. I mean, which is totally par for the course. That's how they generally work. But that all said, I'm feeling good, Keith. I had a nice watch with our patrons last night of the episode. I've got a lot of thoughts. In fact, I was left... It's funny, our current status of the world, I'm very happy that various... groups, minority groups that have long been oppressed and have not had their voices heard are seemingly getting an opportunity, however
in
late.
Some areas,
in some
at
areas,
sometimes.
and sometimes, trust me, I understand my privilege and I'm not, I'm not trying to minimize any of that. So, but it's interesting through that lens, you start to adjudicate whether a storyline like we're going to talk about today is enough. How much kudos and pat on the back do I want to give them from back in time in 1993? I think it's very progressive and a lot of interesting avenues to discuss this week. But I don't want to get too congratulatory because is it enough is the ultimate question.
That is, I think that, and to be fair, especially when you're talking about gender and sex and all of that and all that kind of stuff with Star Trek, is it enough? Is a really big and interesting question for the 90s era generation. Today, I think its representation is done pretty well, but in the 90s, even by 90s standards, we had some questions. Mm-hmm. But I think this is a very interesting episode to discuss. So, very excited to get into it. And Mike, you mentioned you watched the episode last night with the patrons. How does one do that? That sounds like a fun plan.
All you have to do is pony up your hard-earned cash and join us at patreon.com/K&M, like our dear friends Brian Kaufman, Casey Clark, Cloudlover69, Jason Moe, Jorge Navoa, and the mysterious gaming account, who also gave us a lot of fun alternate names, so we'll have to swap that out here and there.
Which I already did swap it out. You just didn't swap it out.
Oh, I didn't download the new thing yet. It's been a morning.
Mike has been going through it. So,
but as long as that gaming account stays with us, we'll swap in the pseudonyms. Alan Zimmerman, CRM Productions, Charles Babbage, and Grim Toys. Welcome to the family. We're so thankful. Those who join us on the Patreon get all kinds of fun stuff. They get to watch me watch Deep Space Nine relatively intoxicated. They get Mike and Keith watch the animated series. We watch some TNG. We've bounced in AMAs, sneak peeks of new shows when we're dropping them, and things like that. So thanks for your support. Patreon.com/K&M, integral part of the team.
Big time, yeah. And because I do have the updated slide, here's here's my favorite one from, of course, gaming account, but of course we know them as Charles Nivens.
Yes.
Our good friend Charles Nivens, we've been communicating with for a long time. But I think the best pseudonym, and it's up there, is Worf's Boot Shivs. if you're a fan of Look at My Star Trek Toys, not only did Mike manifest the idea of boot shivs, our good friend JD created it. So many shivs, so many
so little
wonderful
time.
things. So many shivs, so little time. But that feels like a good opportunity to start talking about time. Perhaps even going into the time machine to talk about the time that Rules of Acquisition aired. And that, of course, was on November 7th, 1993, which reminds me, folks, election coming up. Make sure you vote. Early voting is starting in many different places. Get your mail-in ballot if you need that. So get on it, folks. It's coming up. It's always important, and we always are going to be talking about that stuff on the show. But it wasn't in 1993, unless it was a local election, because that was an off year. But November 7th, 1993... the top song, I'm so excited because we can't really do the covers anymore because we get copyright notices. However, I feel this is such a this is a gimme for you, Mike.
Okay. Can't wait.
This is a gimme. We're going to get a magnificent rendition of I Would Do Anything for Love, but I won't do that.
Anything for love, but I won't do that. And what is that, Keith? And apparently, this just in, that's subscribe to Mike and Keith's Patreon at patreon.com/K&M. No, just kidding. I thought I had a joke and I forgot it. And so I tried to improv something and it didn't work.
I would do anything for a joke, but I can't remember the second part because I forgot the first part
Wait, hold
while
on.
I'm making the joke.
How about, and I would do anything for love, but I won't find a bad cover on the internet because then we get a copyright claim. And apparently, when you get a copyright claim, you still can't monetize your channel. So you really can only use non-copyrighted audio, and it's really a pain in the butt because it doesn't offer you a lot of solutions and fun things you want to show your viewers. But we're gonna make it work because Keith and I are trying to make a buck.
I mean, I thought that was a great solution. Of course, this is the legendary Meatloaf, which I of course remembered this song being huge, but I don't think I clocked that it was Meatloaf back in 1993. And if you told
Jim
me,
Steinman, man. Jim Steinman and Meatloaf.
Of course. Look, I saw the original production of Dance of the Vampires, so I'm there.
I saw the Meatloaf musical.
Bat Out of Hell.
Twice, Keith.
Twice.
So can I quickly tell you my Meatloaf Bat Out of Hell story? Maybe it's for geekly, but whatever. I'm going to tell you right now. So Jen, my CEO Jen, my wife, her press agent for the show she was in was also the press agent for Bat Out of Hell Meatloaf when it came over to America. And so, do you want to go, Mike? Of course I want to go. So I went, and as is sometimes the case, that seemed like the type of musical you want to go to high, right? So I was
it's like
high.
3/4 of your identity. Yeah.
Yeah, I was pretty high. But what I wasn't expecting was, without even close comparison, this was the loudest live musical I've ever been.
Really?
And it was so loud to the point where it started pumping. The bass was thumping my heart so fast I thought I started having a panic attack. That the weed mixed with the loud bass physically altering my chest cavity, I had a panic attack. When I resolved the panic attack, I had maybe one of the most rip-roaring times I've ever had at a theater. It felt like The Wedding Singer in its sort of comedic audacity. Mostly planned comedic audacity. 20% not planned. Yeah. So anyway, I went back. Again with my brother and my good friend Mike, and we watched it again. This time I was stone cold sober, and the comedy was still there. It wasn't 80-20 planned. It was more 30-70.
Yeah. Well, I think the message here is, if there's a Jim Steinman Meatloaf musical in your area, go.
Yes.
Because it will be incredibly memorable. Dance of the Vampires is one of the most memorable things I've ever seen on a Broadway stage. I'm choosing that word carefully, but I definitely feel blessed that I was able to witness it in front of my eyes. So don't miss the opportunity. All right, we have to keep moving because we have to talk about week 2 of The Nightmare Before Christmas, which was our top movie once again. Halloween was over, but our love of The Nightmare Before Christmas was not. Mike, what else were we watching that night?
Okay, some interesting things I've forgotten all about. In the primetime slots on ABC, we were watching Home Improvement, obviously, that we at the time really loved.
Sure.
Grace Under Fire, which was sort of like ABC's other Roseanne attempt.
It was fake Roseanne, but it was pretty good, I think, if I remember correctly.
Then the 10 o'clock movie was Moon Over Miami. I don't know, was that even a movie or was that a TV show? It says it's got a subtitle. It had an episode title, Careless Dentist Blues. So that was a show, Moon Over Miami.
Sure.
In the primetime slot on ABC, we had Thea. Do not remember that show. And then followed by Joe's Life. So ABC was firing on all cylinders.
Firing up. Woo, ABC.
CBS in primetime had The Nanny, of course. And then remember that special? How'd they do that? Do you remember that? Where they kind of showed how they did. Okay, not so much. And then on Fox, Keith, it was the Power 2 Hour. We had Beverly Hills 90210, followed by Melrose Place. That's when Fox was like, "Oh, we're C-Dub before C-Dub, or I guess it's now E, right? They were E before E. Anyway,
Is it E now? Have they changed it?
well, E is kind of where all those like reality show type. Like,
Well, yes,
your Housewives
yes.
and what, which is why that kind of Beverly Hills 90210 was sort of the kind of a precursor to that in a way. Anyway, and then on NBC we had Unsolved Mysteries, one of my dear favorites, Robert Stack. Thank you so much for your creepiness. And then Now with Tom Brokaw and Katie Couric was a primetime news thing they did at 9 o'clock on NBC.
Yeah. Well, interesting you mentioned The Nanny, because in the season 3 trailer for Picard, would you believe we see Daniel Davis back for a quick shot? Do you know who Daniel Davis, who played Niles on Nanny, do you know who Daniel Davis plays in the Star Trek universe?
Is he the dean? No, who? I don't know.
He's Moriarty.
Oh, wow.
So that's
Data's foil, right?
Data's foil, yes, who we saw in 2 very memorable episodes of Next Generation, who's apparently coming back, which to me, I'm certainly hoping this means that Picard will have at least a couple of one-off episodes, as opposed to the, and I love the serialized stuff, but I miss like the episode of the week, and if we have a Moriarty episode, I am here for it. That's going to be fun. So our last little segment, we do here, timely segment, we hit the hard news here on November 7th, 1993.
Put the kids to bed, because it gets serious here.
Yeah. No, this is very good. You probably got all of this in your history class, depending on what age you were. But so here we got a bunch of important news to talk about this week, including, of course, 1963 plane crash survivors found after 30 years. Luckily, they were on a Gilligan's Island paradise, so they were fine. They were happy. We also a man. We figured this out. I don't know what it did to the markets, but a man turns lead into gold with just supermarket ingredients. I feel like Quark would be all over that. A psychic gets a letter from Jesus. Always good. Jesus, of course, is before email. So if you Jesus need to send communication to a psychic, send a mail. Throw a stamp on it, get there. And lastly, of course, a massive UFO sucking boats out of the ocean. Big week. Really, really big week in the hard news, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, though to be honest, cruising has gotten cheaper. But back then, if you paid the high prices, you could get sucked up into a UFO. It was, instead of the buffet, sometimes you wanted to get that ascension.
I don't know what any of that means, but I'll take it. I don't know what type of cruising you were talking about, but we're getting sucked up and there's a boat, and I don't know what you're talking about.
You're dirty. Come on.
Oh, I'm dirty. Sure. All right, let's talk about Deep Space Nine, Season 2, Episode 7, Rules of Acquisition. This episode was directed by David Livingston, who last directed In the Hands of the Prophets, the season finale of Season 1. It has a teleplay by Ira Stephen Bear, and a story by Hilary Bader, who last did Battle Lines. So, very interesting. It's funny, Mike, you don't know it, but this is actually a very important episode on Deep Space Nine, but it's all like super casual about it. Huh. And I'm really curious to see, to hear your thoughts about that. But before we do that, let's do a little trivia.
Nailing it.
Now, Keith, waste your time with trivial trivia. All right. Well, this is the first mention of the Dominion in this episode. And at this stage, it was just a name for an idea to be fleshed out later. I'm not going to talk much more about it for spoilers world, but just, hey, there it is. Somebody mentioned the Dominion. That's interesting.
But apparently it's not just, they don't just mention it. This is one of my questions of the episode. It's like the whole point that like Quark is negotiating about something with somebody, but it's not really like explained. It's just we see Nagus make a face.
That's right. We'll talk more about it, but I don't think it's much of a spoiler to say maybe the Dominion's going to play a role moving forward.
Yeah, I would say that tracks.
That tracks. So big spoiler, folks. All right, next up this episode, began as a Next Generation episode that didn't get produced, which is interesting, with Pell, the character of Pell, being involved with Riker, which is interesting as opposed to Quark. I could totally see how it would play out that way, and Riker did have a similar episode to that. But so this was an idea that got kicked around, and sometimes when there's a leftover from Next Gen, it doesn't feel well integrated when it comes into Deep Space Nine, but this one definitely did, I think. So next up, the first time this episode aired, when they did the episode title, acquisition was spelled wrong. The same way I always screw up how you spell it. They forgot the C. Interesting, because we've been talking about typos.
C in acquisition?
There sure is.
Oh, I totally spelled it wrong on my recap for the watch along.
Well, but you're in good company, because that showed up on national television. It's funny how often typos still exist, even on the biggest scales.
Huh.
They did subsequently fix it, so it only aired once wrong, but they did go back and fix it. Next up, this is the first portrayal of a female Ferengi in all of Trek, and there will only be 2, if you'd believe it. And this is the first time we see the game of Tongo. We will be seeing Tongo many more times moving forward, but this is the first time we see it. And lastly, this episode was nominated for an Emmy in makeup design.
Yes.
Of course. I mean, because with this, you've got like makeup on makeup and layers of very, very cool. The makeup team that got nominated for an Emmy were Camille Calvet, Thomas E. Surprenant, that's what I wrote. Chances are I wrote that wrong, but I accurately said what I wrote down. Karen Westerfeld, of course, under the tutelage of Michael Westmore. So that's trivial trivia. Let's talk about what Next Generation was doing. This week, they aired the episode Attached, in which Picard and Crusher get telepathically attached, and it's awkward.
It's like Freaky Friday, TNG style?
Well, isn't Freaky Friday they switch?
Oh, this is just telepathically swapped?
They're able to read each other's minds.
Mm-hmm.
And they've been like, will we, won't we bone for like six and a half seasons at this point. So it's interesting. Our guest stars this week include Helene Udy as Pell, Brian Thompson as Inglatu, who we would see on 2 episodes of The Next Generation, 2 episodes of Deep Space Nine, and 1 episode of Enterprise, for a total of 5 different characters. You might also remember him from The X-Files. We, of course, have some of our regulars, Max Grodenchik as Rom. We have Amelia Crow as Zairi, Tiny Ron as Mayhardu. And, of course, Wallace Shawn is back as Zek. We have ourselves a full-on Ferengi episode, which is one of the things that Ira Stephen Bear did a lot of developing of the whole Ferengi world, which is cool, which is interesting.
Did you state who directed this episode?
I did. It's David Livingston. I almost said Ron Livingston.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't Ron Livingston. It's David Livingston.
I have to say, I'm glad they got an Emmy for makeup design. Absolutely worth it. But kudos to Livingston for the direction of this episode. There are more brilliant framings and shots in this episode than of recent memory. Now, because of the aspect ratio, they have to be super close shot a lot. And so it demanded that the makeup be excellent because the Ferengi faces take up a large portion of the frame. But they just used a lot of cool up angles and ways to, and lighting was excellent. I think I said in my watch along, this is one of the most, and this whole season has been, and it sounds like it's going that direction, has been one of the more cinematic type seasons. I keep saying the money's on the screen. What I mean by that is it looks just beautiful. Now, I have to say, Keith, we talked about this last week. I think I'm watching an AI upscaled version. Yes. So it's like extra
Which
beautiful.
You still haven't given to me yet.
Yeah, I meant to do that last night, and then I didn't. Did you see me attempt to come up with an excuse, but then just be like, I didn't do it?
You want to try and tell that joke again?
No. Anyway, I will send you that. But I need to watch. I need to do a comparison. I need to go back and watch it on Paramount just to see. Like, I'm sure it's still as beautiful, but it just you'll see in some of the screenshots. It's like, oh my god, this is like, it's so beautiful. So, kudos. If nothing else, when we talk about this episode, it is just startlingly beautiful.
Yeah, which is funny to say about a Ferengi episode, but I think you're right.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's time to look at some of those screenshots. Let's go into our screening room and talk about this episode.
Oh, I didn't.
No.
I didn't do that. Sorry, that was my fault.
Oh no, that's right. Well, I just got a press release. A strange loop is closing. Oh, that sucks.
Oh, that does suck. In fact, while you got that, my phone buzzed and told me, and I've turned off all notifications from all apps on my phone. So the fact that one worked through really pisses me off. A, and B, you know what emergency notification got through to me, Keith?
What's that?
It's Andrew Lloyd Webber week on The Masked Singer on Fox.
That somehow got through.
Which makes me mad that it got through, and also mad that that's where we are.
Oh my! I mean, how did that
Strange
even?
Loop is closing, but damn it,
Andrew Lloyd Webber
singers are gonna be singing. The banana will be crooning to cats.
Oh my goodness! Well, that's a memory. Yeah, no, I'm gonna have to get into the city and go see Strange Loop before it closes. Obviously.
Let's go. Let's set a time. Let's have a date.
I'd love that.
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it. All right. Very good. So, all right, what are we doing? Oh, Deep Space Nine. Yes.
Yeah.
So
right.
In the teaser,
Morn, you can't. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here, buddy.
You can't stay here. Morn is asleep on the promenade on a very comfy bench that we have never seen. But it makes sense. I mean, the promenade is sort of their, like, town square, their main street. Of course, they'd have some benches there. But he can't. So Odo wakes him up. And he can't go to Quark's because there's a bunch of Ferengis doing a private game of Tongo with Dax. And Quark is naturally touching her without consent.
So this is where a lot, it started. Yes, I understand eventually we get to the point where we're pointing out that the Ferengi gender politics are less than...
They're awful, is what you're looking for?
Horrific. But dang, they started right away. Like, we haven't really mentioned this before in the lore, at least in my experience. I mean, yeah, the Dabo girl thing, but they're working girls.
Have we not?
Not really. Not really. Not to this extent.
Oh, not on Deep Space Nine, I guess. But
yeah, I mean, in my watching along, I keep saying, I was like, ooh, this is problematic. Like, now, I'll get to when we get to the reveal, but it starts off, it's coming in hot.
No, for sure. Well, we know from Next Gen, at least, that Ferengi women aren't allowed to wear clothes.
See, I didn't know that until they said it, and that's when I paused. I was like, so you're telling me that this entire race of people want their women, they can't learn, they can't read, and they're nude all the time?
That's right.
That is extreme.
Well, yeah, no, it's pretty extreme. So, in the show's defense, the show's not like, whew, wish it were like that here.
No,
like, it's
I
not
get
on the
that.
not
I
on the,
get that.
the,
My
the
point,
side of that.
I don't mean this. This is going to be a talky episode, I can tell. But that said, I mean, people got on the WWE pretty hard. That's a professional wrestling league.
As they should have.
Because they went to Saudi Arabia to do all these things for money, and they made, like Saudi Arabia has its own issues with the gender politics. And so... we shouldn't be dealing with those people. And yet, the Ferengi, it's much worse than that. But yet, it's like, come on board, we're going to do business with you. Open a casino. I mean,
well, and that's where it gets interesting when you start talking about the Prime Directive, right? The Star Trek's whole thing of non-interference and non-judgment. I think I thought you were going to talk about the Attitude Era for the WWE, but oh my God, you watch some of that. Oh, just like, ugh. Anyway, I think the difference in the defense of our heroes in Starfleet is the WWE is putting up with that for commercial gain. Where I don't think the Federation is trying to make money off of the Ferengis.
It's fair.
So I think that would be the difference. But yeah, No, there's a lot about the Ferengi culture which is pretty extreme, and we are going to get into it to some extent.
Yeah, because I got more
As
questions. Once we get to like the budding rom com of it all, I still got some more questions about, well, if what what is their mating practices? Are they arranged marriages? How can you fall in love with people that are so subservient? Like, what is that whole thing?
well, I mean that's been part of our human experience from the dawn of time too. So
A very rom
anyway,
com episode of Deep Space Nine. Moving on.
it is all right. So anyway, Dax, of course, wins, and Rob says it's good because it's okay because they're being beaten by Curzon, the male, not the female Dax. But of course, Jadzia says, Jadzia is a better player than Curzon ever was. We are reminded, just like you said, of just how blazingly sexist the Ferengis are. Women are not allowed to wear clothes. They're not allowed to do anything. I wrote down, I wonder if gender or sex or gender is going to play a role in this episode.
Yeah, really wonder. I also wonder if the creators of Deep Space Nine went forward in time and sued Wicked's costume design because they basically stole it.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. That's
Look at how beautiful that is. Like already in the teaser, it's just the close-ups, the costume design, the makeup. It's so beautiful. If only we had close-ups of ear hair later. I hope that we do get.
I sure hope we do. I mean, I'd love a great ear hair shot. Yeah,
especially if they're combing it. But
So Dax asks Quark if subservient and helpless is how he'd like her to be.
And naked.
And naked. I think probably leaning on that most. Armin's performance of I really do, seems, and maybe I'm curious what your take on this is, because I wrote that it seems like he was intentionally annoyed about the clunky doubling down on the writing. So Armin was annoyed and put a stank on that last I really do that said, this is stupid, I shouldn't be saying it, so I'm going to say it weird.
I don't know. It kind of rang a little true to me, to be honest. I think the stank was just putting some emphasis.
I think, but it was too much. He was like, I really do. It felt like, screw you for making me say this.
I like that take, but I don't know if you're asking me for real. I really feel like this whole episode, what I appreciated about it is that they knew it was going to be rom-commy. They knew they were going to up the tone, the comedic tone, because it's a Ferengi episode. But it's uniform and consistent through the whole episode, including Dax in the couple scenes she's in. So it didn't feel too much. I think maybe they asked him to bump it. I don't know.
Leave a comment below. Like, go back and watch that. It's right in the teaser. Was that Armin being sarcastically overdoing it, or the character of Quark that broad? I think it was Armin. Well, we should have him on the show someday and ask him.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, we see Rom arguing with a new Ferengi waiter we haven't seen, who has magic salty beans to sell to Quark. They make you drink more, like peanuts.
Look at that shot. Damn it.
He loves the Ferengi. The waiter and Quark are talking. Wow. What I wrote down, because I typed this. No, because I typed this really fast. So sometimes when I'm reading it back, I have to quickly translate what I meant when I wrote it, because it's full of typos or whatever. And what I wrote was, the waiter and Quark bone then, the Grand Nagus calls. They boned later, not then. I think I meant to say bargain, then the Nagus calls. The Ferengis are headed into the Gamma Quadrant, and Quark will be the lead negotiator. So we are set to the task by the Grand Nagus, and that closes our teaser and brings us to the beginning of Act 1, where we see in Sisko's office, the Nagus is there and offers Sisko and Kira some beetle snuff. That is clearly Wallace Shawn's stash of weed. He sneezes and blows his nose in the most cartoonish fashion possible. What did you think of beetle snuff, Mike?
I dug it. The only time it upset me is when I said it quickly 3 times in a row.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Okay. You were waiting for a Beetlejuice joke, right?
I wasn't actually, but I like that you went there. I went there.
I've actually been appreciating how I've kind of gotten in tune with how you write these recaps, and I've been taking screenshots based on what I think your recap will be. Speaking of mind melds, Keith, we've really started.
Too many hours doing this,
Yeah.
buddy. So Kira antagonizes Zek with pointing out Ferengi stereotypes for cheating everybody, which is interesting. Kira's like, "Screw you, Ferengis! I hate all of you," which was rough. But then he offers Bajor some fertilizer as a peace offering. He tries to cheat them, but then Cisco shuts it down.
Well, sorry to back up. Beetle snuff is just Coke, right?
Basically, yeah. Just made of beetles, I guess.
Beetle Coke.
Beetle Coke.
Look at that.
That makeup design, that is really, really impressive.
Keith, can I get real gross for a minute? No, I'm not going to do that. Hold on.
I hope you would. I'm really hoping you get gross.
Okay. Imagine, if you will. No, you know what? I can't say that on the internet. You know what?
With everything that you've said over all the years, all of the things you have said over the years, the clips I have lined up on my soundboard from other shows.
I can't do it. Let's move forward.
Wow. Well, patrons, Mike's going to have to say it on patreon.com/K&M and find out what disgusting thing Mike wanted to say. So we head back to Quark's quarters, and the Nagus sets Quark to the task of acquiring Tula berries from the Dosai. But it's not about the berries. It's about getting a foothold in the Gamma Quadrant. I'm excited that we're actually going to go and acknowledge that the Gamma Quadrant exists, because we did definitely forget that it was there. So this is good.
Keith, how many Tula berries would it take, or how many pounds of whatever fertilizer would it take for you to make out with this guy?
Well, I don't know. What did he buy me dinner?
I mean, he's going to give you 150 million tons of whatever, beetle snuff poop or whatever he promised the Bajorans.
Wow, it's so hard to turn down beetle snuff poop. Anyway, Quark is excited as he talks to Rom, and the waiter comes up. Their name are Pell, that we met earlier, and reminds him to be skeptical of too easy an opportunity. And
this was the ear combing. Sorry, I'm a little behind still. Ear comb.
Keep up, Mike. Keep up.
Ear comb.
Ear comb. I mean, just like the ways that they discover new gross things to do with the Ferengis every week. So fun.
All right, here we are. Now I'm caught up.
All right, there we go. So, Pell, of course, reminds Quark to be skeptical, to be careful, and they quote the rules of acquisition back and forth. Quark then gets nervous that he's going to be blamed and wants somebody to help. Rom, of course, wants to do it, but he gets shut down and decides to take Pell. Then we follow Pell home and watch them remove the giant lobes and put them in a box, revealing smaller female lobes. In 90s TV, I guess this means they're female. Today, we don't really know much about their sex or gender, only that they wanted Quark to think that they were male. But 90s TV is like, oh, it's a woman. So, but that obviously would not play out today. So what did you think here with the reveal?
So, I had so many thoughts. First of all, it needs to be said, I like to think I'm pretty progressive. I like to think I'm open-minded, an open-minded ally of all shapes and sizes and identifications and what have you. This had me hook, line, and sinker, Keith. No idea. All of the big gender politic up front nothing prepared me. I fully was a sucker for the reveal. I was like, oh! Now it makes sense. So
it doesn't mean you're not progressive. It just means you're a dummy.
So kudos to the writers for the general demo back in '93, because they got me, which then raised a whole bunch of questions as to what. I guess it made sense at that point. Obviously they didn't know. Well, I mean, they do say that she does identify as a female throughout the episode. So.
We do later she will
Yes.
identify as female.
And like it seems like they're giving us like the impression that she's binding her breast slightly in the uniform as well. Like regardless, it made a lot of sense, right? Because and actually the plotting's really well done. The pacing's really well done in my opinion, because at this point I'm still wondering, because she's Ferengi, so what is she's clearly got a business motivation, and I'm trying to think, okay, what's the screw here? So it's interesting where it goes. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking, oh, awesome. They were really heavy up front about we are oppressive to women, and now here's a woman who's equally Quark's match, if not superior in her aggressive
business
bargaining
acumen.
And business acumen. So that's where I am.
Yep. No, for sure. And at this point, we'd never seen a Ferengi female before.
Yeah.
So we didn't know that females, Ferengis, have smaller lobes or whatever. We're just
My first thought when she took the ears off was like, she's not even Ferengi. I thought there was like a helmet thing coming off next, and that it was like a total imposter. But
oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. All right. Well, we begin. Oh, and I was going to say, you mentioned the pacing of the episode. Having the reveal be at the end of Act 1 is great, because normally that's like an end of Act 2 or end of Act 3 reveal, whereas this, like, we have a lot more story to get through, so you're not just sort of dragging that out slowly. Might as well just get it revealed. So in Act 2, we meet the docile.
Everybody get in.
Just get in, everyone. Yeah, which is remarkable because Tiny Ron and Wallace Shawn are very different heights. So I think that's why we had to have such a low angle shot, because you'd never get them both in the same shot unless you were like put the camera basically on the floor.
And Keith, riddle me this. The outfit that Quark is wearing, is that the one I saw on the Quark action figure?
Damn, that's good, Mike. Yes, it is. Well played, which he also wore in the pilot. Yeah. So, I mean, those Ferengi outfits are just extraordinary. Anyway, so we meet the docile who Quark is set to negotiate with. They look utterly ridiculous. They negotiate, they're big and angry, but Pell rescues the discussion. Did you watch X-Files?
Off and on, yeah. I wasn't a weekly watcher, but I watched a lot of it.
See, he was like the big alien baddie.
Yes, this I know. They kind of given me, like, you know what they reminded me of was him specifically, because of his like weird, his very oval head, is the foot from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Oh, I
have the design of all of the like random baddies were called the foot soldiers.
So then we go to Ops, and Mayherdu brings Kira an earring from Zek, which gives us a chance to hear Kira and Dax discussing the Ferengi. Kira calls them greedy, misogynistic, untrustworthy little trolls. Dax is like, yup, but then says, once you accept that, they can be a lot of fun, which is an interesting lesson on acceptance, and also, I think, a direct statement to the audience about getting on board with Ferengi episodes. From Ira Stephen Bear, trying to add a little nuance to the ridiculousness that is Ferengi. But Dax has a very Federation way of approaching it. Like, you know, they are all of those shitty things, right? But it's all about, acceptance and difference and meeting people where they are. And it's an interesting conversation that I think that there's a really good argument on both sides of.
Yeah, right? But and why I like Dax being the person to have that viewpoint is because Dax has what most of us don't have, right? Which is scale, right? The bird's eye view of time. And so, any sort of affront taken in a zoomed in kind of macro time view is much more, I talk about this often when I talk about people getting married or long-term relationships, where the type of fights you have in the moment when you're dating someone look different when viewed from the lens of we want to be together for decades. So, that's kind of her vantage point here, and I appreciate it.
Well, and Dax has another layer of interesting point of view there, because the Dax symbiont has been multiple different genders.
Mm-hmm.
So you both have time and gender fluctuations there. Now, of course, you zoom out into the macroverse, like it's written by a dude, right? And so who does not have all of those experiences. But I think it's very interesting, and I don't know necessarily where I come down on, you know, being friend, like, can you be friends with somebody that misogynistic and not carry some of that? Do you try to change from within? Do you try to change from without? I mean, I think we all negotiate these things, not even just on like the big isms, but just like within a family or within a whatever. Like,
And I
I have to
appreciate that. I appreciate they don't come down particularly on one side of that, because look,
Yeah.
I think you and I generally wear our politics on our sleeves. You specifically do often, and that doesn't mean that you can't have political issue disagreements with people and not, be totally pleasant or friendly. But can you be lifelong, like, soulmate type friends? I don't know that that's possible, because
Well, there's a line somewhere.
right.
And I think that we're all living in a world where we're trying to navigate where that line is. I mean, do you want to be best friends with somebody who's in the Klan? Right? At what point are you allowing that person's hatred to not be challenged? At what point are, hopefully by showing an example of how to not be that way, you might influence some change? What is the way to affect change? I don't know, because it's different for everybody, different for every situation. It's interesting.
That's why
Anyway.
we talked about this before, but that's why science fiction is great in many ways, because it allows you to just take an issue, or take a question like that, a philosophical question like that.
Yeah.
And instead of giving you an answer or forcing a viewpoint on you, which a lot of television does, a lot of media does, obviously. But if you just reframe it through the science fiction lens, so you're just looking at the same question through different chess pieces, it often gives you pause to think. And at the end of the day, I think we could all agree on this. If more people would actually stop and think about their viewpoints and their biases objectively, I think that we'd have a lot more clear conversation.
And be willing to examine things from another point of view.
Yeah.
From another perspective. And I think that is kind of essential to our growth as humanity, is to continue taking in new information. Anyway, blah, 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 politics. Later, Dax and Zek and all play more Tongo. Quark is nervous about the negotiations. Zek ups the stakes. I don't need 5,000, I need 50,000 barrels of whatever. Quark is scared, but Pell is excited. Pell pulls Quark aside. Quark doesn't know why Pell is being so nice to him. Dax clearly picks up on a vibe between them. So the next morning, Dax sits down with Pell to investigate what the deal is. They discuss Quark for a bit. Then we hit a big moment in Trek history. I'm curious to see what you picked up on this. But Dax gets Pell to admit that they love Quark. Dax is not fazed by this at all and asks if Quark knows. Pell says he doesn't even know I'm female. Then Dax is surprised. It's subtle, but Dax's lack of reaction to what she thought was a same-sex attraction was radical at the time, and certainly not necessarily welcome from the homophobic producers, usually attributed to Rick Berman, although I don't know that for sure. But this was like a big moment in Trek history and 90s Trek history, because it's done subtly, it's done just in the subtext and in performance. But we're establishing here that in the future, at least Dax couldn't give a crap about about the same-sex relationship, which we don't today, right? Who cares? But in 1993, that was like
I absolutely clocked that. And I think that you would hope that in the future, things like that would be more uh not a big deal. I couldn't think of a better way to phrase that. But it's superseded by a moment later, I think. Like
Interesting.
this was I thought that there was a moment later that was more nuanced. Well, I don't know, nuanced is the word, but more layered in. It was that sort of a doubling down on that idea, and I appreciate it.
For sure. And I clocked it then. And I was already an ally in 1993 due to my grandparents were activists, and so I was like I was out as an ally then. But it was a big deal, and it was it's today it seems like such a nothing burger, but it really was a big deal then. So we'll continue talking about it as we go on. We learn that Pell is indeed a woman and is dressing as a man so she can work and acquire profit in the sexist Ferengi economy. But then she fell in love with Quark. Because, how could you not, right?
That's the thing that kind of, I didn't really see that spark, but I guess sometimes you don't. But if you really think in on this, because she talks a little bit about her upbringing, like, it seems almost, it sounds like within the Ferengi culture and the way they sort of run their society, her circumstance here is a near impossibility. I mean, if you're not even taught to read, and if you want to learn to read and then acquire profit and get off planet and do all the things she's done, clearly you can't let anybody know about it unless she came from a family that was sort of sheltering, like secretly allowed,
super progressive,
and helping her achieve those things. It's a really difficult road she chose. And also very surprising that she's able to find that affection for someone in a male of that species who's treated her such a way.
Well, yes. I mean, for sure. And obviously, there are lots of parallel cultures existing right here.
100%.
100%. Like that is that in various cultures, it is every bit that hard to accomplish that. And every bit that much of an accomplishment as it is for Pell here. But I think one of the things that we're going to continue developing about the character of Quark, right? Quark, by our standards, is this oafish lunatic, right? But by Ferengi standards, Quark is actually pretty progressive.
Yeah.
And so, again, it's all about perspective. Within the Ferengi culture, Quark is much more accepting and much more open-minded, and I can understand why that would be appealing to Pell, even if by our standards, Quark is an absolute jackass.
Right.
Anyway, so Quark arrives. It's time to keep negotiating, and we head into Act 3. Kira goes up to Zek to return the earring. Alas, his hopes for a night of wild passion and romance are dashed, but he does have a wildly intricate costume, which you can see in that screenshot there. Look at that.
Yeah, pretty awesome.
So cool. Quark arrives with Pell. The negotiations have failed. Zek is furious. Pell interrupts the shouting and says they're still going to make a deal. So they decide, and they've gone back through the wormhole. They've pieced out after failed negotiations. But Pell and Quark decide to borrow Zek's ship and go into the Gamma Quadrant to track them down. We see the Ferengi shuttle. It's somewhere between silly and cool looking.
Yeah.
But we see those globes from Next Generation, from the battle. Season 1, one of the more watchable Season 1 episodes, even if the Ferengis are ridiculous. Anyway, Pell and Quark discuss if Zek might be intentionally sabotaging negotiations, but agree that Zek definitely knows more than he's saying. So, and if it wasn't clear before, everyone's seen this episode, but Zek is continually asking them for more and impossible things in the negotiations, but we don't know why. So we go back to this. The vibes increase. it's definitely written to be that Quark really appreciates the friendship. But I think Armin Shimmerman is playing actual attraction to the male version of Pell.
That's the vibe I got.
Because, like, at this point, Quark does not know that Pell is female.
Mhm.
And in Armin's performance, like, everything there is genuine. Like, they absolutely could make out, and I would totally buy it.
Well, and
why
I think that it's a beautiful sort of what I would hope for my space operas, that like it's non-gendered. I think they both play the attraction very pure and I wish I knew the terminology better, but just very sort of not about gender in any way. They really just kind of care about each other, which explains why her attraction was so fast. And
Yeah.
and he just enjoys someone who understands him, has the same it's very poly, if you will.
Yeah, totally. And like, and why couldn't it be that way? So we head back to the station and we see Packlids in the background as Rom tells Odo how envious he is of Pell. Odo says he'd never let someone come between him and his brother. Which is it's a weird scene. I understand you want to get Odo in there, but like, why is Odo throwing fire on that?
I mean, if you want to get fanficky, maybe Odo doesn't like his sort of
100%.
Yep.
That's it. Of course, because Odo and Quark are the love story of the series.
And he's like, he sees someone edging in on him, and he's like, hell no.
Yeah, 100%. That's canon in my brain now.
Nailed it.
I love that. Rom immediately goes and ransacks Pell's quarters, looking for dirt. Naturally, he discovers a pair of fake lobes, which I thought was interesting because it's a good thing Pell has multiples.
Mhm.
Otherwise, this whole thing would be moot.
Also, like, thanks for being discreet, Rom. He just like trashes the place.
Early.
Once again, dear Odo, do we not lock the doors? Do we not have any security? What's up?
Well, look, Rom has some technical skills we haven't explored yet.
Okay.
But yes, we don't even bother to explain how he got into
Or maybe
Pell's
Odo was
quarters.
like, oops, I found a key. I wonder what this leads to.
Oh, yeah, maybe Odo. Here we go. Let's continue the conspiracy theory. I think Odo had already ransacked Pell's quarters and already knew.
He's
the
like, whatever
secret.
you do, don't go into that third closet.
Exactly. Don't go into the box under the bed. There's nothing there you want to see. Yeah, all right. That makes sense. So in Act 4, we go to the Dosai planet that looks like a pretty iffy matte painting. But it turns out it's a party profit planet. It's violent and wild-ish by 90s Star Trek standards. Someone is killed right in front of them, which was like, oh, shit, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Then Quark runs into the guy he negotiated with. He tries to get him to sign a new contract. Quark is persistent and breaks their water cooler for some reason. And apparently that works.
Mm-hmm.
He makes progress and they stay for the night. That's such an odd move by Quark. Listen to me. But
Gling, gling, gling.
I mean, I guess they're treating the Dosai a little bit like Klingons, where you earn their respect by doing wild and aggressive things. But okay, sure.
All right, Keith. But you know what we've been missing this whole time? If we're gonna go rom-com, which this whole episode has been in my case, we need that weird bedroom scene.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do. So they decide to stay for the night, and of course, there's only one bed. Pell panics, but Quark wants to go to bed, and she stalls with wine and flattery. Then they're 100% about to make out. Pell kisses Quark, and he lies back, and Quark responds to that by lying back on the bed, because Quark is 100% on board.
Yeah, I mean, there's not a lot of inhibition here, if you want to look at it that, which I think is great.
100%. I love it. Like,
it could have easily become a very uncomfortable homophobic response,
right,
comedically played, which I think doubles down on uncomfortability. But it is not that at all, which was like my most surprised moment because I just saw it going there.
Well, and yeah, no, for sure. And I wonder, and again, because of all the tales of behind the snes with allegedly Berman's uncomfortability with anything with that. Um, I I wonder if that's Armin's choice. If he's like, because there are plenty of allies on this. I bet Armin was like in the stage direction. He's freaked out, and he's like, "That's not how I'm going to play
Well,
it."
there are 3 questions I have. Well, not 3. There's a question I have. No, there are no questions. Here are my hopes and wishes. 1, if we could see a script, I would like to see if there are stage directions and how it is played. Like, okay, that's A. B, absolutely imagine Armin had some thoughts. C, it takes 2 to tango. I guarantee you they captured many a take on this scene, right? So I'm sure there was a variety of decisions. So at some point, it came down to the director and the editor in that edit booth, and they made some choices. And so and then those had to get greenlit through the network. So there was some. I wonder if there was some conversations, some kickback, because clearly there was conversation around this scene.
Oh yeah, no, it had to be. Okay, hold on. I have the script.
All right, we're going in on it, folks.
All right. So while you were doing that, so what are we in? We're in Act 4, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Come on, we can do this. We're gonna find it. This is great to do live. Mic top for a second. Oh, here we go.
Okay.
Oh no, here we go. He lies down on the bed. Nervous Pell looks to stall. She gets wine. There's wine there. Let's go to bed. She pours him another glass. It's a very nice smile. Suddenly, Pell lunges forward and kisses Quark on the lips, who reels back in shock. But before Pell can explain, so it says he reels back in shock. I don't think that's what we played.
Yes,
or at least there was shock, but not revulsion.
Mm-hmm.
Which I like that.
I would if I was to retro write the script based on what I watched on screen, my stage direction would have said she lunges forward, kisses him on the lips. Quark reacts with surprise.
Mm-hmm.
I would say surprise instead of shock, which is a very distinct difference.
Yeah.
When it comes to intention.
Surprise, but leans back. He does not get off the bed. He does not leap to his feet. He just leans back.
And the beat that's played next, where the Dosai comes in, is not like there's no disgust, there's no uncomfortability. I think he's just willing to accept what happened. He puts it on the back burner to think about later. And it's like, we have to, because what's cool about this and the subsequent beats in the show is that regardless of the intention, the this, the that, any of the romantic stuff, regardless of it, it is always secondary to their prime directive, which is the profit, the negotiation, which is like a subplot of the whole thing. But here, clearly we see the priorities jump.
No, and let's talk about the next moment here, because the Dosai lady arrives and catches them, who is also not in any way bothered or surprised by a same-sex makeout session.
Well, yeah, I mean, you saw that party we just came from. That was basically an eyes wide shut scenario.
Yeah, like who cares?
Yeah.
But again, the tolerance and lack of horror was radical at the time. And I think that it was important and great. There's some problematic parts of this, but that part of it, I really appreciate that they were able to sneak into 90s television past Berman.
You know what I think, and I'll get to this in our wrap up, but I think it's still radical, Keith, because if you look at the way a lot of these types of modern relationships and modern issues are being handled in media today, a lot of times I feel it feels heavy-handed.
Mm-hmm.
It feels forced. It feels overly done in order to make a point. Instead of, I think it's appreciated, obviously. Representation is appreciated in all ways, forms, regardless of how it is. But I think that when we get to the point that it is less radical and more just what it is, I think that's when we've reached the point of saturation where it's like, okay, now we're getting somewhere.
Yeah, where it's not like about here. That. No, and no, for sure. And I think this is a point where I think where we are geographically, we're in the States, right? and B, where we are geographically, we're in a part of the country where we're mostly there. But that is not true of much of our country today. So this is still radical in some parts of the country and with some people. It is only within the privilege of our circle and our life where I don't even notice it anymore. Anyway, great. I like that very much. So the docile lady tells them that they don't have as much Tullaberry as Zek is wanting, but will be willing to put them in touch with the right people who have that much for a price. She talks about the Karama. They're the ones who have it. They are an important power in the Dominion. So later on the shuttle, Quark and Pell are very excited. They figured out the whole thing. This whole thing is about meeting with the Dominion. And Quark's plan is to ignore the kiss. Poor Pell is sad. And you feel for her. They arrive back on the station, and Quark tells Zek he found the Dominion. Zek says he's only heard whispers and rumors, but that whomever finds the secret of the Dominion finds the secret to the Gamma Quadrant. So that's what this whole thing has been about. That's such a great lighting in that shot there.
I was going to say, the lighting in this whole sequence is just exquisite.
So good.
Look at those two shots, like bang, bang. The framing, like this could just be a general OTS, but it's better than that. It's like framed like you would frame a still shot. Really good.
Yeah, but it's also, I think, Deep Space Nine affords you the ability to have more variety in your lighting, because Next Gen is so lit. It's almost overlit, but on Deep Space Nine it gets darker. There's shadows and little dark corners all over the station, and I think that's just gives them the opportunity to do much more interesting stuff. So so we find out what the whole plan was. It's about finding the Dominion. Meanwhile, Rom is trying to interrupt them to out Pell. And in exchange for a percentage of all the commerce in the Gamma Quadrant, Quark gives Zek the name of the Karama. Then, in was probably the more problematic scenes, in pantomime in the background, which I did like. I love that it was in pantomime in the background. We see Quark getting told about Pell's secret, and he passes out in a ridiculous farce.
Okay, but what I take from it, because once again, I think tonally, for the most part, it was consistent throughout, so this wasn't as farcical as it was just kind of in line. I mean, yes, but that all said, what I'm taking is, it is in Quark's priorities, it is more radical to have been outsmarted by a female than it is to be gay or to have a same-sex tryst.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I think that is the message there. It's interesting.
Which begs the question, how are any babies made on Ferengi?
Well,
is that the name of the planet, Ferengi?
Ferenginar,
okay.
is the but
Hashtag Mike learned.
Mike learned a new thing. We haven't been there yet, but we will be. So in Act 5, Quark wakes up in the infirmary. He's fine, but at least we got Alexander Siddig a line.
That's what I said. I was like, well on the episode, buddy.
Yeah. Quark says they need to keep the secret because he'll be ruined. Excuse me. He'll be ruined if Zek finds out. He makes a deal, this is big, to transfer the bar to Rom if he doesn't tell Zek. Which of course is fine, because if Quark gets a percentage of all the deals done on the entire quadrant, he's going to be rolling in it. Quark then goes to meet Pell in her quarters, now out of the disguise. Quark wants her to get dressed back as a man.
This was the one where I was like, wait a second, what?
I don't find you as attractive this way.
It was weird, right? It was very Mrs. Doubtfire, but they were like, Dad, you got to put the suit on.
Well, I mean, from Quark's standpoint, he has to keep the ruse going up to save his profits. So you get it. What I thought was amazing was that she's able to transfer in about 10 seconds
Hmm.
with all of the prosthetics, that kind of stuff. So she walks out of the room, they cut for 2 hours, and they come back and they continue because that makeup takes forever. Um, anyway, so he gives her latinum and tells her to leave. They realize that despite their love, Quark can't accept her living with him in a too non-traditional way, where he's sort of trapped in his conservative culture. He can't accept her the way that she is, which is tragic for both of them. And we see a remarkable shot. This shot here, we see Quark in the foreground, and I thought, I mean, you can see that Quark is also heartbroken, and I thought this was a fantastic performance by
Hmm.
Armin Shimmerman here. Um, Showing us the camera vulnerability, but hiding it from her. And it was such a real moment.
Well, and it was emphasized, I thought, by the not non-homophobic approach to the previous scene, where it was like that just shows that whatever connection they had superseded it, and that it wasn't about their connection. It's about he can't be the Ferengi culture will not allow him to be
Well,
with such a progressive woman, which is
it,
that's the tragedy.
yeah, and it's tragic. And also, I think it doubles down. His real emotion in this scene doubles down on the fact that he was in love with Pell while Quark thought that Pell was male, because he didn't fall in love with her in the split second he found out that she was female. He was already in love with Pell by the time he found out. Otherwise, he would not be having these feelings. He would not be heartbroken.
And once again, I thought it was paced well. They gave enough little tidbits of them connecting over the rules of acquisition, connecting over her ability to help her, supporting him in moments
Yeah.
where he was feeling weak. I thought they really, in 45 minutes, there's only so much you can do. And I thought
I know.
they really placed enough of those beats.
They built a real relationship in there, which I thought was very interesting. Yeah, and it's funny. Like, I've seen this episode, I don't know, 5-6 times, but this is talking it through with you here is where it really becomes clear to me that he was in love.
Mm-hmm.
He was in love with Pell as a man. I don't think I'd really clocked it quite so well.
And it belies everything. I mean, we'll talk about it once again. They set it up. It's going to be a jokey joke type episode. It's Ferengi. It's going to be silly. It's going to be this. And then they like pull the wool and they're like, oh, this is like an actually pretty powerful episode on many levels.
Yeah. And just bringing, I was going to say humanity to the Ferengi, which I guess is a speciesist way to handle it, but they're not real. So, but yeah. So later, Rom eats a giant beetle, which I bet was a soft-shelled crab.
I don't know that I didn't give any thought to.
Well, I mean, because I always, whenever I watch them eat weird food,
Mhm.
I try to figure out like where was the
At least he
substitution.
was really eating it, because I've seen too many times on too many shows people
Mhm.
miming food and it makes the cut. So I hate that.
It's just like, how do they, when do they switch from regular worms to gummy worms? When do they switch from whatever to whatever? But that was all in camera, so that had to be a real thing that he was chewing on, which is why I think it was a soft-shelled crab. Anyway, meanwhile, Quark is eating green goo with the back of a spoon, which is odd. He has the spoon backwards, and Zek is eating with chopsticks. So it's a very diverse food and utensils. Then Pell shows up, surprise, dressed as a man. She reveals herself to be female. Zek is furious, and he threatens to throw her in prison. Interesting that she decided to like fight for herself here, and I liked it. Quark ends up defending her.
I think it's double awesome, because clearly, because of the potential ramifications for Quark, she chooses her exposing the hypocrisy of the male dominant society over her affection for Clark, which I think is Clark. Who the hell's Clark? Clark Griswold. Quark. Because, Keith, I think that is like exactly the message we want, right? It's not
right,
because it could easily be like I fell in love, and so
it's not a love story.
No.
She does not subjugate herself to anything, including her love story with Quark.
I think this is the scene of the show that's like tripling down, which I just really thought was cool, because they could have easily done it the other way, where she could have just like snuck off and let in order to save Quark from the humiliation or whatever, but she doesn't do that.
Yeah, and puts Quark in a position where he ends up having to defend her. And of course, Zek says stupidity
and lose all his profits. He lost it all.
Lose all of his profits. Stupidity is no excuse. He loses all the profits, but together, Zek and Quark decide to keep it a secret because Quark's like, well, if I got fooled, you got fooled too. But Zek takes all of his money. So once again, last time Zek was here, he made Quark the Nagus, took it away. Mm-hmm. This time he's going to make him a trillionaire, took it away. So we have the final scene. We see Quark and Pel share a final kiss as she heads for the transport. And then lastly, Dax is comforting Quark, who is clearly heartbroken.
Keith, your summary forgets the best part of the whole thing.
What is the best part of the whole thing?
Not only does she expose herself sounds right, reveal herself to the Nagus but also at the very end of it all, you know what she says to Quark? She's like, it's been nice, but I'm taking those 10 bars of Latinum anyway.
Yeah, damn right, because she's a businesswoman.
Yeah, so like she gets the upper hand on everything this episode, totally screws all the guys. Whereas Clark. It's
been a long day, Mike. It's been a long day.
Where Quark is pretty heartbroken, right? It's clear. She's like, it's been great. I'm taking that cash. I made my points. Peace.
Well, I mean, I do think all of her feelings were real.
Absolutely,
I think she really did feel it.
But my point is that she can be both emotionally tied and very business shrewd and not let her feelings...
She's still a Ferengi.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's just awesome. I think her character arc is so cool.
Yeah, I think it was very, very well done. Okay, well then that's it. You know what it's time for, Mike?
Oh, I do.
Yeah, get ready. And now it's time for Mike and Deglio's Star Trek Vocabulary Quiz. I don't know why I used your full name, but anyway. So your first word is tulaberries.
Oh, tulaberries. Well, that is very much like it's a fauna. It's a fruit of a fauna of a place that is being used in Ferengi negotiations here as sort of a MacGuffin to get Quark and Pel together.
And what do you do with tulaberries?
You paint your face.
You turn them into wine.
Yeah,
but
tulaberry wine.
You might also paint your face. They didn't have painted faces. All right, so this next one's a big one, and I'm curious to see what your answer is. Mike, what is the Dominion?
So the Dominion, Keith, really interesting. I thought at first that it was a species of people, but it's not. It's a collective of species or something sort of that exist in the different quadrant that is very shrouded in mystery. But apparently there's some great bargains to be had there. So, for all I know, it could be an outlet store. But we know that we definitely want to get there is what we know.
Folks, here it is. The Dominion, an outlet store.
Yeah, you want cheap Nikes? You can get them at the Dominion.
They're last season's, but they're really cheap. Okay. Amazing. All right, let's come along home.
Oh, that's it? All right.
Count to 4. AlamarEmmys, then one more. AlamarEmmys, it's AlamarEmmys time!
All right, here we are in Quarks. There's the heartbroken man himself behind us. So Mike, were there any wormholes in this plot?
So the only thing that I found a little blurry for me was like how much agency or how shrewd is the Nagus, right? It seems like he was sabotaging negotiations. Of course, Pel and Quark put that together, but his sort of plot, his motivation from the beginning doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. He seems a little surprised when the whole idea of the Dominion and what's the other plate, like what's the species that's our portal to the Dominion?
The Karma.
The Karma. He seems kind of shocked that that even came up. So I don't know if he's shocked that it worked or he's shocked that Quark. I just don't quite see what his whole agenda was from the get. That's my biggest blurry bit.
Yeah, I think his motivation was he did know about the Dominion because he said it was like, I'd heard about it in whispers and shadows, but I know it's the secret to that is a secret to the quadrant and all of that. I think the question is why wouldn't two questions. Why wouldn't he search himself? I think the reason there is to protect himself, to stay in the shadows. And two, why wouldn't he tell Quark what the plan was?
Yeah, right. What did his ignorance? What did he have to gain by his ignorance?
I think it was believability from the standpoint of the Dosi to think that Quark wasn't searching for the Dominion. I think the idea is like you don't want the Dominion to know that you're searching for them or something like that. So if you send somebody,
potentially, I guess you could, if the longer you can keep Quark in the dark, if somehow you can potentially gain access to the Dominion without alerting Quark to its riches,
totally, yeah,
then you don't have to share the profit.
Yeah, so I think those are probably what Zek's motivations are, but it is a little murky. I'll give you that. Yeah, I mean, I don't really have a lot of particular holes. I think you plugged the hole explaining what Odo's motivations were for stirring that pot. That then made sense to me.
The only other wormhole, and it's more just like a story untold, the story I'd like to hear is I want to see Pel's origin story.
Yeah.
What did she have to go through to get to where she's at? Because she's not just like, I learned to read. She's incredibly shrewd and incredibly intelligent. So
no, she kicks everybody's ass. Well, I bet you there is a beta canon novel or something that tells that story. There is so much beta canon in Star Trek you wouldn't believe. All right, so yeah, not a lot of wormholes. Mike, what was your best moment?
Oh, there's so many good moments. I think. Well, I sang the praises of the scene in the bedroom with Quark and in the ship afterwards. Or no, yes, in the bedroom with Quark. No, in the ship afterwards, after the
shuttle,
kiss scene. Yeah, where she's like, we should talk about it. And he's like, no, we don't need to talk about it. That didn't come from a place of homophobia. I guess that's the closest we came to it, where he's like, I don't even want to talk about it. But I think he played it enough that it seemed like he didn't want to talk about it because let's just focus on the mission at hand, right? I think Armin, like you said, did everything in his power to shade his performance away from those moments that could be construed as homophobia. Yeah. For me, though, I'm going to choose the scene, kind of combo scene where she both reveals herself because it shows that I'm not going to be the damsel in distress. And then also takes the cash because Ferengi's going to Ferengi. So those are my two conjoined. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I'm torn. So I'm gonna do two as well because we write our own rules here. It's a Ferengi episode. We can do whatever we want. One is the first moment where Dax is not shocked by them being in love, right? Just in terms of the placement in history, the placement in time, and the importance of that moment and what that meant in this world. The subtlety of it, the performance of it, it was just important. And I think great. And my second one is going to be Armin's performance in their last scene where he has to tell her we can't be in love despite clearly being in love. I think go back and watch just that last scene and watch Armin's face. He does such a good job acting under all of that craziness. Such depth of emotion that we'd never see from Quark. Such vulnerability that we never see from Quark. I thought it was just extraordinary. So, yeah, really liked that scene. So, Mike, what do you say we hand out some self-sealing stem bolts?
So this is fun for me because the past few weeks, if I recall, I was pretty high on the episodes after I watched them, and then once we sort of put them through our paces, the luster wore off a little bit. And I'm feeling pretty strongly the opposite way this time. I liked this episode yesterday when I watched it. But talking through it, I've come to really respect it a little bit more than I did. First things first, I think that on the whole, at every turn, they learned a lot of lessons this week from other episodes where we think there's not a lot of there, or that everything they did belied the expectation and some of the standards they set. From the onset, you're thinking, oh, it's going to be jokey joke, it's going to be silly, but they were able to take the edge off the silly by keeping it tonally consistent throughout. So it's a heightened reality, a heightened tone throughout the whole episode. So nothing feels particularly garish comedically or over the top, but because they had Dax kind of fall in line with that with her performance, and we barely see anybody else, it felt cohesive for the show as well. A. B. It is absolutely stunning to look at. This is just an absolutely stunning episode to watch. Visually, direction-wise, costume. It won an Emmy, for Christ's sake. As we had an issue episode, what was it, 2 weeks ago? Last week?
Melora, yeah.
Yeah. Which at the end of going through those paces, we were like, but it didn't really like advance the issue or discuss the actual issue at hand at all, really.
Right.
As much as we thought. This episode does in spades. I think it raises a lot of cool questions. I think it is radically progressive for the time, in spite of itself, it appears, from all I'm hearing from you, which is even more amazing. And what's really unique is that with some, there are bones to pick, but on the whole, that sort of progressive lens holds up in 2022 for a show that came out in 1993 for the most part. I mean, it's as effective today as it probably it's still.
I think so. Yeah.
And that is so amazing. And that is because of the writing, because of some decisions and clearly hard conversations that took place, some courage on the production side, and an amazing performance by both Armin and, I'm sorry, what's Pell's actress name?
It is Helene Udy.
So I think they both give a really compassionate performance, which they probably could have been they could have been huge, but they didn't do that in any way. And I really just appreciate and respect it for that. So I have to go pretty high here. I'm going to go 90 self-sealing stem bolts. I'm going high. I really liked it.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I think, I said it in the beginning that this is a sneakily important episode of Deep Space Nine, where it's a Ferengi episode. How could it really be important? It's sort of a comedic, lighter tone. How could it be that important? But it's tremendously important in a couple of different ways. Obviously, with all of the gender and sex questions here, there's so much more to be mined. There's so much more that they could have done. But considering what they did, as opposed to making it the homosexual angle of it in the foreground, because they kind of couldn't at this point. They did it, they backgrounded it, and instead of making it an issue of the week, what they did is they put in radical and, at the time, subversive tolerance. And they told the story through the lack of discomfort or lack of intolerance and lack of whatever from all the other characters, from all in the show. And that their lack of homophobia was subversive at the time. And I think very important and great. And that's what makes Star Trek fantastic. I mean, you go back to the original Trek, right? We watch an episode of the original series and we see a diverse bunch of folks on the bridge and they're doing their Star Trek stuff. We didn't even think about it. But back then, that was crazy subversive to have a black woman running communications, to have an Asian man have a Japanese man on the running the thing. Well, or American, that is. That was a huge thing, right? And then at the time, and Star Trek not making a thing out of it, them not like, okay, well, let's all address this. Like, look at us, look what we're doing, whatever. They didn't do any of that. They just, we're living in a world that doesn't give a shit about that. That's not paying any attention to that. That doesn't matter. And that is the subversive tolerance of Star Trek, going way back then, and then to today. I think it is incredibly important. So I really liked that. And
just to add a little context to that, because it goes far beyond just the show. So you'll recall when Ellen came out, and that was ABC. So on ABC, Ellen came out on her show, and it was a huge deal. It was a huge deal in media, but the network recognized it was a huge deal, and so it promoted it as such. And that was in 1997. So that's 5 years later, or 4 years later. So here it seems like the network didn't push this as like a gender or a homosexual storyline, or push it in any sort of way. It just was another episode of Deep Space Nine on TV in 1993.
Right. And again, they didn't put their thumb, and it was that radical tolerance, just by example. Really cool. The drawing room farce.
And you compose it because we're not judging the episodes on it, but it's not just radical tolerance on the screen. It's whoever had those conversations and pushed back on the production side.
Yeah.
It's those things go hand in hand to create what we have.
Yeah. Yep. And that's the writing, that's the direction, that's the performances. That may have been subverting even the atmosphere that they were producing the episode in.
And that's art, baby. That's what collaborative art is about.
Yeah.
Because you'll find a lot of more conservative, and I don't mean that politically, I mean that in sort of the general term, storytelling in professional arts to this day, and the people making the art, be it in stage, theater, television, whatever, it is rarely a politically conservative group of people. It is a wide rainbow of individuals.
Indeed.
Tolerance is almost necessary to be an artist working.
Yeah.
And that's not today. That's throughout time.
Oh, no, for sure.
And so it's great when you see, I think, and once again, Keith and I speak from a place of privilege, and I recognize that nothing will ever be enough. Right, we could go through this and pick the shit out of it through today's 2020 lens if we wanted to.
And in 20 years, somebody can pick the shit out of our conversation right now.
But I think for its time, for what it's trying to do, and for the battles, the hurdles it had to jump in order to tell the story it told, I gotta give it the kudos.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it elevates what otherwise would be a pretty stereotypical woman dressed as a man. That's a Shakespearean trope. You see it in opera. You see that trope constantly. But it rarely addresses you see in Shakespeare, you see in opera, you see in classic literature, woman dresses as a man, they're friends, but she's in love with him, blah, blah, blah. That the whole thing happens all the time. But this was I was going to say modern adaptation of that from 1993. But I think elevated it in a very interesting way. So that's obviously, we've talked ad nauseum about that. Everyone's tired of us talking about that. The other piece of this that makes it very important, and Mike doesn't know why, and I don't even think the show knew why yet, but the introduction of the Dominion. I'm not going to say a lot about it, but I know that Armin Shimmerman said later how proud he was to have the first mention of the Dominion happen in a Ferengi episode. Like it's a bit of a feather in the cap to play a big role in that. So super fun, super important. I highly recommend this episode. It's a little underrated gem, I think. So
I clearly overrated it. So what are you giving it?
I don't think you overrated it. I think for its importance in the lexicon, I think you're there. For me, I'm gonna give it an 88.
Okay.
Very, very good episode. So next week, another fascinating episode called Necessary Evil. Going to be fun to talk about. So we will be talking about that next week. If you are still watching, thank you so much. Tell a friend. We very much appreciate it. Give us a like. Give us a
Hey, Keith,
subscribe.
what else is happening on the channel? Anything else exciting?
Well, we are now debuting our new show, K&M Geekly, a weekly show where Mike and I discuss geeky stuff that we are interested in that week. We'll have some throwbacks to our childhood, as well as super contemporary stuff that's happening right here in the minute. This coming week, we are going to be reviewing Halloween Ends in the horror genre, and Mike doesn't know about it. Maybe he does, but I'm going to do a definitive ranking of every single one of the 13 Halloween movies. So
Cool. Looking forward to that.
Stay tuned for that. I literally have it on my phone, giving it some thought. Very important.
Hey, if you appreciate what we're doing here, come be part of the team. You can be a producer. You know how the producers had to fight on this show? You can fight for us with your wallets. Join the likes of those on the screen, especially Worf's boot shivs. Thanks for joining. We appreciate you all. It means a lot. It really means a lot. I can't tell you. Keith and I don't wear our emotions on our sleeves much, but we appreciate so much the love and support. In fact, a few of you have upped your donations in the past few days, and so we appreciate that quite a bit.
For sure.
Yeah, so thank you.
Yeah. So anyway, we'll see you back next week, and check out a new episode of Toys on Saturday. So we are Saturday, Monday, Wednesday in your feed. That is way too much of us. I'm tired of that much of us, but we appreciate you watching. So till then, this has been Keith and Mike Watch Deep Space Nine. Thank you for watching K&M Entertainment. If you enjoyed our particular brand of nonsense, please like and subscribe. Or become one of our patrons at patreon.com/KNM.